so glad that you all stuck around. We know you made the whole trip for this play. If you don't mind, I'd like to give a special welcome to my mom and dad. They are part of Kentucky history. My father turned 90 years old this year. My mother's much younger. Seriously, she's much younger, and she looks much younger. But I'm so glad to have my parents with me today. Now, you don't have to give them an applause. This has been a fabulous year. These kids have done an awesome job. We teach Kentucky history from a text. It was written in 1896. It was reprinted, but it was the public school text. It refers to God and providence throughout the book, which was legal then, and it would still be legal now. And so we really enjoy the content of this book. It's a little difficult. Some of you seventh grade parents have figured that out. But they wade through it, and they have a great English teacher. But occasionally, I can get in touch with the author, Mrs. Kincaid. She was an educator in Kentucky, and she was asked by the state of Kentucky to write a textbook. And believe it or not, lights. Miss Kincaid has agreed to come and give us a lesson in Kentucky history.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Kincaid, and I'm the author of this book. Like Mr. Henderson said, his history teacher here, and he and I have become very good friends over the years. When this book was first published in 1896, I had no idea they'd still be using it today. I'm so honored. I always loved Kentucky. I think my father's run for governor was a big part of that. He didn't win, but I know he was proud his daughter could have such an influence. I've made friends with the major characters of Kentucky, and Mr. Henderson asked me to invite them to be with me today. A few of the men who showed up, and even more of their wives. We're going to take you from the first explorers in Kentucky all the way to the climax of the Civil War. So with that, I'd like to introduce a man a few of you may have heard of, an early Kentucky explorer named Simon Kenton. Simon, come on out.
Hi, my name is Simon Kenton. Let me tell you a bit about myself. I was born on the first week of April 1755 in Hopewell, Virginia. I was the seventh child born to Mark and Mary Kenton. I grew up in a little log cabin on a hill. We were expected to work on our farm. Every season was full of work. We felt like we had to work to survive. Though I never liked working on the farm, I would always refuse, saying, "Me work? No, sir, I'd rather die first." Just like I hated work, I hated school. Even though I hated school, I loved to learn. I loved to learn about the wilderness. The nature I experienced from the trees to the streams were my textbooks. I was fascinated by the wilderness. I was also fascinated by Indian tales. All this talk appealed to my childish imagination. I was fascinated by Indians. As I grew older, I wanted to explore the wilderness to find and learn about Indians. As I was becoming a man, I had a crush on Ellen Cummings. Before I could make my move, she married another man, William Leachman. After the wedding ceremony, I challenged Leachman to a fight. He beat me good, but a year later, I was given another chance. On that day, my dad asked me to fetch the community saw from Sam Leachman, William's dad. I found William using the saw and saw my opportunity to attack him. After a vicious battle, I thought I killed William. I was afraid of being caught as a murderer, so I fled from Virginia and into the wilderness of Kentucky. In the wilderness of Kentucky, I became a skilled hunter and tracker. These skills also made me a good soldier. I fought in many wars, including the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. I was also a good friend of Daniel Boone. I once came to the rescue of Daniel at Fort Boonesboro. On that day, Indians attacked the fort. Daniel was shot in the ankle, and an Indian was coming to scalp him. I moved quickly and clubbed my rifle and brained the Indian. After this, I would be used as a scout because of my great skill and bravery. I was once captured by the Indians and on a scouting party. The Indians were not merciful. They made me run the gauntlet, which is a long line of Indian men and women, or men and boys armed with tomahawks, clubs, and switches. I ran it 8 times, and I once took a tomahawk to the head. Later in life, I struggled, made some bad decisions, didn't have a lot of money, and I lost my wife in a house fire. Though something did happen that was very important. In 1808, at a Methodist camp meeting, I confessed my sin and gave my life to Jesus. After that, I put down my rifle and never used it again. But before I go, I want to introduce you to a good friend of mine. His name is Daniel Boone.
Well, good morning, folks. My name is Daniel Boone. Let me tell you a bit about myself. I was born in a small log cabin on November 2nd, 1734. I lived there with my mom, pa, and 10 siblings. I lived on the farm with my family for a while. Then, when I was old enough, I joined the British in the French and Indian War. After the war, I got married and raised a family, and in 1767, I made my first journey into Kentucky. The game out there was beautiful. You could find deer and elk, even buffalo. Unfortunately, we were forced to head back because of some bad weather, but a year later, decided to try again in 1768. We hunted out there until 1771. I got another chance to return to Kentucky in 1775 when a kind man by the name of Richard Henderson asked me to make a trail through Kentucky to help the settlers get through. I was overjoyed for the opportunity to return to Kentucky, and so I agreed. Me and my men made a trail over 250 miles long, going all the way to the Kentucky River. We built a fort by the river and called it Fort Boone, after me, of course, and the settlers moved in, and we called it home. I convinced my wife to come with the kids to live at Fort Boone, and so they came over to Kentucky. Life at Fort Boone was very hard, especially since the near settlements were pretty far away, food was scarce, and you never knew when the Indians would attack. I remember the day my daughter was kidnapped by the Indians on a Sunday afternoon. We pursued the Indians for 2 days till we caught up with them at their camp, and were able to free my daughter. We all returned safe and sound. I've had some other unpleasant encounters with Indians. Once they forced me to run the gauntlet. I had to run between this long line of Indians with tomahawks, like this one, and they'd swing them at me. I made it through by running in a zigzag line, and eventually I escaped those Indians, made it back to Fort Boone. My life was full of adventures, and I came out of each one alive. I've always loved Kentucky, and I persevered through the hard pioneer life to succeed. Well, I better get going now, and I hope you love Kentucky as much as I do.
Although a law at the time prohibited him from serving consecutive terms, we loved our first governor so much we elected him to lead the Commonwealth again 20 years later. Join us on stage, Governor Shelby.
Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. My name is Isaac Shelby, and this is my wife, Susanna Hart Shelby. I was the first and also the 5th governor. Most people that I've talked to have thought that I was a great war hero. That may be true, but all I was trying to do is help this country be a better nation for you and for me. I was born on December 11th, 1750, in Hagerstown, Maryland. My mom and pa were General Evan and Letitia Shelby. I was not a strange boy, but there was a mighty fine girl that I admired as I was growing up. Her name was Susanna Hart, who eventually became my wife on May 20th, 1783.
April 19th, Isaac. Hello, my name is Susanna Hart Shelby. You may not know a lot about me. I was born on February 18th, 1764 in North Carolina. My mom, Howard Nathaniel, and Sarah Simpson Hart.
In 1775, the Revolutionary War broke out, and I was called to the war. Fought for many years, lost a lot of friends and family, but I made it through. And on July 4th, 1783, the war ended and America declared their independence. I eventually moved back to Hagerstown, Maryland, where I'd marry Susanna Hart that year. In 1790, we moved to Kentucky, which was only 2 years before Kentucky became a state in 1792. Kentucky asked me to be the first governor of Kentucky. I did not care to be governor, but this state needed to be put back together from all the battles and wars that had been fought in it. So I agreed. And on July 4th, 1783, I became the first governor of Kentucky.
After my husband became governor, he addressed the state senate. He did not linger with his words, but when he went straight to his points. He called for 1, establishment of public and private credit, 2, speedy settlement of land disputes, 3, laws regulating future elections of members to the legislature, 4, laws obligating sheriffs and other public offices to give security for the due performances of their respected offices, and 5, laws compelling proper treatment of slaves. He closed his address by pointing out that the Constitution had also made it their duty to choose commissioners to fix the permanent seal of state. It is assumed that during my husband's first term as governor, he designed our state seal. The seal was approved in the year of 1796. I never got around to asking him if he designed the state seal or not, so I don't really know, and really nobody else knows either. The seal is a picture of 2 young Kentuckians embracing one another. It is said that one of these Kentuckians is Daniel Boone, and the other is assumed to be my husband.
In 1796, I was succeeded by James Garrett, but I became the 5th governor of Kentucky in 1812 because the War of 1812 just broke out. They asked me to be governor so I could lead and direct men and place men on the battlefield. During the war, one of the most important battles in Canadian history commenced in the War of 1812. It was called the Battle of the Thames. Some people may say that I was a great war hero in that battle. That could be true, but everyone was also. The war ended in 1816, the same year that I resigned as governor. As the months drew near for me to resign, the Bluegrass was on a financial footing and well-organized court, military, and state government structure. I resigned as governor in 1816 and moved back to Lincoln County, Kentucky at Travelers Rest, where my wife and children were waiting.
While my husband was away on business, I would stay home and take care of our 11 children. You may know one of my daughters, Sarah McDowell. She married Ephraim McDowell, who was the first successful surgeon. Oh, hi, Sarah.
Hello there. I am Mrs. Sarah McDowell, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Isaac Shelby. As Ma said, I was wife to Dr. Ephraim McDowell, who was a famous surgeon in Kentucky. You may not know the story of my husband Ephraim. Many people have not heard what he did. Ephraim was born in 1771 in Rockbridge County, Virginia, on November 11th. In 1783, Ephraim and his family moved from their home in Virginia to Danville, Kentucky. He went back to Virginia to study medicine in 1791. His teacher helped him along and encouraged him to go to the University of Edinburgh. So he left Virginia in 1793 and took the long trip to Scotland, where the university was, and he studied there until 1794. Ephraim returned to Danville and set up his practice as a doctor here. That is where he met me, and we were married in 1802. We had 9 children together, but sadly, 4 of our dear children died.
In the 1960s, then-Senator John F. Kennedy got together with a panel of senators and determined the top 5 most influential senators of all time. Our favorite son, Henry Clay, was on that list, and many thought he held the top spot. Henry's wife, Lucretia, is here with us today. Come on out, Lucretia.
I'm Lucretia Clay. I was born in 1781 to Colonel Thomas and Susanna Hart. In 1784, I moved to Kentucky. I married the famous Henry Clay on March 18, 1799. We had 11 children: Henrietta, Thomas, Theodore, Susan, Anne, Lucretia, Henry Jr., Eliza, Laura, James, and John. You probably don't want to hear any more about me. You probably want to hear about Henry. Well, Henry was born in 1777 in Hanover County, Virginia, just 2 years after the Revolutionary War had started. His father died when he was 4. That left his poor mother with 7 children to feed and clothe. Of course, she remarried soon. When Henry was 14, his family moved to Kentucky, leaving him apprenticed to George Wythe, Chancellor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. He was admitted to the bar to practice law in 1797. He was a very successful lawyer. In 1806, he was elected to the Senate, and in 1811, he was elected to the House of Representatives. He was chosen Speaker of the House on the first day of his first session. He ran for president in 1832, 1840, and 1844, failing each time. He was known as the Great Compromiser, mostly because of the Compromise of 1850. Even though he was away from home, he wrote faithfully to the children and I. I hated writing, so I was often slow to respond. And we led a happy life in our home in Lexington, Kentucky, in spite of our many trials and deaths. On June 29th, 1852, my faithful husband of 53 years died in Washington, D.C. He was 75 years old. On July 1st, his funeral procession walked sadly up Pennsylvania Street to the Senate. After a brief service in the Capitol, he was carried to the rotunda to lie in state. Abraham Lincoln delivered a famous speech praising Henry. Here is his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln.
Hello, my name is Mary Todd Lincoln. I was born into a large family of 10 people. However, it became 9 very quickly because my mother died when I was 6. After this, I became very lonely and depressed. Even more so when my father, a year later, got married to a woman that I barely knew. I coped with my depression, though, by distracting myself with certain things such as school or books or reading or anything that I could get my hands on. I went to a women's college when I was 22, and afterwards I stayed home with my family. One night I went to a party where I met a man named Abraham Lincoln, and let me just tell you something, he was the worst dancer you could have ever met. He stepped on my feet and he didn't talk, and at one point in time he dropped me, but somehow he found a place in my heart, and we were married 9 months later. We had 4 children, Robert, Willie, Tad, and Edward. Edward died when he was 2, and after this, my depression showed up again. It increased when my husband was elected to be president. He was never there, and he was never there for any of us. I was so lonely. There was nothing that I could do to cope with it. So I tried my best to distract myself, failing each time. I went to parties. I went to galas. I redecorated my house, for goodness sakes. I did anything that I could, but none of it worked. After the war was over, me and my husband decided to go to Ford's Theater, to go to a comedy to try and lighten up the mood. But there, John Wilkes Booth shot him in the head. He died the next morning, and afterwards I wanted to die. I tried to commit suicide twice, failing each time, and my son, Robert, thought I was crazy, so he put me in a mental facility for 4 months without any contact from any one of my family members. After I got out, I tried to buy enough morphine to kill me, but the clerk switched it out with sugar pills. I was sent to live with my sister in Springfield, Illinois, where I lived the rest of my life.
Most people know that we in Kentucky claim 2 presidents, Abraham Lincoln and Zachary Taylor. But there's a third you may have forgotten about. The first, last, and only president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. Jefferson's wife, Farina, is here with us today. Come on out.
My name is Farina Davis. I'm married to Jefferson Davis. Since I know some of you here share my feelings about the War of Northern Aggression and my dear sweet husband, I'd like to tell you some things about him you may not know. I was only 17 when I married Jefferson. After the Civil War ended, I was almost 40. Jefferson was in his late 50s. Let me tell you right off that my husband was not captured by those Yankees in one of my dresses. Those rude, disrespectful soldiers represented all that was wrong with the North. They resented the pride my husband had in the South and decided to attack his reputation by starting that rumor. Jefferson was wearing an oilcloth raincoat, and I put my shawl around his bare head to keep him warm should he escape those 2 Yankee regiments shooting at each other. Why, Abraham Lincoln would have worn such a shawl to keep his head warm. Jefferson was no sissy. Time and time again, his men had advised him to flee, but he said he'd continue to fight as long as he had men willing to fight with him. When he parted with me, he told me not to cry because it would only make the Yankees gloat. Did you know when they put him in prison, they shackled him? Well, he made them work for it. He knocked one man and kicked another. My husband had not chosen to be the leader of the Confederacy. He had wanted to fight in the war himself. But he reluctantly accepted, then stayed true to his duty. He wanted a trial. He believed the South had as much right to secede from the Union as America had to be independent from England. If he was put on trial and found innocent, it would mean that the South was not wrong and it had the right to secede from the Union. If he was found guilty, he was happy to suffer on behalf of his people. The government wanted neither result. One end would mean that the war had been in vain and a martyr might inspire the South anew. Jefferson is still waiting for that trial. They did let him go, though. We lived outside the country, but finally settled here in Beauvoir, a home given to us by a friend of mine from school. I don't have time to tell all the good in him, his giving me a revolver and showing me how to use it before sending me and the children away to safety, his giving his last gold coin to a small boy during the war, his encouragement to me to trust God even though he is in prison. Perhaps someday I'll write a book in honor of my dear husband. It would definitely include the story of my husband's wedding gift to one of his best soldiers. The day before John Hunt Morgan's wedding, Jefferson traveled down to Murfreesboro and made John brigadier general. Here's Martha to tell you about her own husband.
Hi, I'm John Hunt Morgan's wife, Martha. My husband was a raider fighting for the Confederacy. Some people called him the Thunderbolt Confederacy. I am not his first wife. His first wife, Rebecca, died several years ago. John and I had a big wedding on December 14th, 1862. After our wedding, I lived in an army camp with my husband. We both were happy, but it wasn't easy living in an army camp. John still ached for adventure. So 2 weeks after our wedding, he and 1,000 of his men went on a raid. Even though John was often on a raid, he wrote me letters. I treasured his letters. Once, I was even captured by Union soldiers, but when they realized I was John Hunt Morgan's wife, they let me go. That was a frightening experience. Sadly, our first baby died, but I later had a little girl named Johnny. She was born after John died, so I named her after her father. We were only married a short time until John was put into a prison in Ohio. His mother and I sent him care packages, and we continued to write letters to each other. In one of his letters, he told me to act like a soldier's wife. That helped me get through this time apart. You can imagine my surprise when 4 months later, he showed up at our home. He and some of his raiders escaped from prison. A year later, while John was on a raid in Tennessee, he was killed by a Union soldier. Some people say that he surrendered, but the soldier shot him anyway. I was devastated.
Form a semicircular barrier against the roads, and there is only one way to get out. This way is to follow the stream. Here, I first saw Kentucky light. Here, I first saw breathed Kentucky air. And here, I grew from childhood to manhood.
I followed the little rivers, that flowed over rocks between the high hills to the rivers, and then somewhere into the unknown world. I hunted the wild game in the hunting season, skilled as an Indian.
Along the cattle paths and sheep trails, black walnuts, white walnuts, hickory nuts, beech nuts fell from the trees in little heaps, and the canopy of leaves turned many colors after the first sharp frost had fallen.
Spring was in the wind. I could feel it. I could taste it. I could see it. And it was beautiful to me.
October pawpaws with purple golden skins I found beneath the trees as I went after the cows. I opened them to find the cornmeal mush softness inside, yellow golden in color, and better than bananas to taste.
I saw New York, a city so large it frightened me. Cliff dwellings as high as Kentucky mountains. The streets and avenues were deep multicolored gorges.
I knew more than ever before my brain had fashioned the sights and sounds and beauties of wild brush and life of the hills that nurtured my flesh from infancy to manhood. When I go beyond the hills to see America's South, which I'd always thought.
We were a distinct part. Though all our soils grew cane, cotton, and tobacco, we spoke fast and we moved quickly.
A land that has kept its traditions of horse racing, ballad, song, story, and folk music. A land that is steadfast to its pioneer tradition of fighting men, fighting for America. And when I go beyond the border, I take with me the growth and beauty of the seasons, the music of the pine and cedars, the wordless songs of the snow-melted water when it pours over the rocks to wake the spring. I take with me Kentucky, embedded in my brain and heart, in my flesh and bone and blood, since I am of Kentucky, and Kentucky is part of me.
Okay, please stand, and we're going to sing the state song. If you are a visitor to our state, we welcome you to stand as well.
The sun shines bright on my old Kentucky home. 'Tis summer, the people are gay. The corn tops ripe and the meadows in the bloom, while the birds make music all the day. The young folks roll on the little cabin floor, all merry, all happy and bright. By and by, hard times come a-knocking at the door, then my old Kentucky home, good night. Weep no more, my lady, oh, weep no more today. We will sing one song for the old Kentucky home, for the old Kentucky home far away.
You know, you can be seated for just a second. In this highly technical world, these folks lived before there was even electricity or microphones or anything like that. And so as a result, a few parts of the play got cut out. And I was especially interested in Isaac Shelby's daughter, who got cut off a little bit. And I was wondering what the rest of your presentation was. Could you share that with us? Thank you.
Ephraim was an excellent doctor. Often doctors would refer patients to him. This happened once with Mrs. Jane Crawford. The doctor was confused because he thought she was overdue with twins. So, in 1809, Ephraim saw Mrs. Crawford. He quickly discovered that she was not having twins, but that she had a large ovarian tumor. My husband warned her that he could take out the tumor, but that no patient had ever lived through an ovariotomy, which is when a doctor takes out an ovarian tumor. She agreed and traveled 4 days over a rough, terribly rocky trail to get to my husband's office. Ephraim had a strong faith in the Lord. Before he started the operation, he wrote a prayer on a piece of paper and kept the prayer in his pocket through the entire surgery. Ephraim offered Mrs. Crawford alcohol as anesthesia, but she refused. Instead, she recited psalms and hymns. On December 25th, Ephraim successfully removed the tumor. He was the first doctor to remove an ovarian tumor without the patient dying. Can you believe that 5 days after the surgery, my husband Ephraim walked into Mrs. Crawford's room and found her making her bed? She recovered and returned back home to her family. My husband later earned the nickname, the father of ovariotomy. I am proud my husband did something so important, but it was not my husband's ability. It was God that helped Ephraim through the surgery. My dear husband died in 1830 on June 25th. He did a great deed to this country and was an amazing husband.
Okay, that's the history play. It's been an awesome year with all of your students. A special thanks to Ms. Kincaid, who also taught English this year and really did a lot of the work. Wasn't this fabulous? Hey, guys, get back up and do one more big bow. If I get all the Kentucky... They'll be up here and you can come get your pictures. God bless you. Have a great summer. See you next year.